Hi everyone, thank you so much for being here. My name is Pierce and I'm the director of the Transnational Literature Series at Brookline Booksmith, just outside of Boston, Massachusetts, and your host for today's conversation. The Transnational Series focuses on stories of migration, the intersection of politics and literature, and works in translation. I just want to offer a quick Zoom webinar tutorial. At the bottom of the screen you'll see a few icons. One of those is a Q&A icon where you can enter in your questions at any time during the conversation. Another button will get you to the chat window. That space is there for you all. Please feel free to chat during the event. I will be in the chat as well, dropping in useful information including links to books by our authors. We do make every effort to keep these events free to attend in the hopes that you'll purchase the featured books from us. So thank you in advance for taking a look and supporting independent bookstores. And finally, you can see us, but we can't see you, so relax and please enjoy the conversation. Today I have the very great honor of introducing Helen Benedict and Eyad Awwadawnan, here to discuss and celebrate the release of their new book, Map of Hope and Sorrow, Stories of Refugees Trapped in Greece. Helen has been writing about refugees for over 10 years and is a recipient of the 2021 Penn Jean Stein Grant for Literary Oral History and the Ida B. Wells Award for Bravery in Journalism. She is the author of 7 novels and 6 works of nonfiction, including the award-winning The Lonely Soldier, The Private War of Women at War, Serving in Iraq, and the novel Wolf's Season. Her writing inspired both a class action suit against the Pentagon on behalf of people sexually assaulted in the military and the Oscar-nominated documentary The Invisible War. She is a professor of journalism at Columbia University in New York. And Eyad, formerly a law student from Damascus, Syria, is a writer and poet currently living and working in Reykjavik, Iceland. During his 4 years in Greece, he worked as a cultural mediator, translator, and interpreter for various NGOs. He also published a featured article in Slate magazine detailing his escape from Syria. I'm so thrilled to have them here together in conversation. Now Helen and Eyad.
Hello everybody. Hi Eyad.
Hello. Thank you for having us here.
Yes, welcome and thanks for tuning in your lunch hour to listen to us or whatever hour it is, depending on where you are. I think there might be some people from abroad today. We thought we would begin with my reading a little bit from the introduction. Pierce, she mentioned the Slate article that Eyad wrote, which has become the preface of the book. So that's what actually opens the book. After which, you want to just talk a little bit about what that is, what your preface is about?
It is talking about my trip, my escape from Syria, and all the way to Greece. When I moved from Syria to Turkey, and also about my life there. And talking a little bit about the situation in Greece when I was in Samos Island. I think you will read more about it.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll read a bit. So the place where we met was on the island of Samos, which is in the northern Aegean, and that's where they have a really terrible refugee camp. Most people know about the one in Lesbos because it got a lot of attention, but there are several on other islands, and the next biggest one is the one on Samos. So even though it's a bit smaller, it was actually more overcrowded and in worse conditions at some points than even the one in Lesbos. And it was on Samos that Eyad and I met. So you'll hear a little bit about that now. So I'll read from the introduction, Hope and Sorrow. This is my friend Hassan. He is a man without hope. These were the words that Eyad Awwadawnan used to introduce his fellow Syrian to me when we met in 2018. The three of us were standing inside a foul-smelling, overcrowded refugee camp, surrounded by tents, rubbish, and flies, while a police officer eyed us suspiciously from inside his guard booth. Hassan knew little English at the time, and I do not speak Arabic, so Eyad translated. I turned to squint at Hassan through the sun. It was June and Greek island hot, and I had just failed to find a working toilet or running water, the camp supply having been cut to 2 hours a day. He gazed back at me shyly, a slight man of medium height with a gaunt face, dramatic black eyebrows, a crooked nose, and a bold streak of white through his black hair. His smile seemed kind, but his brow was lined and his mouth pinched, so I took him for more than 40. He was, I later found out, 25. Shall we go somewhere private to talk? I asked, curious to hear what had robbed him of hope. Yes, follow us, please, Eyad replied for him, and led us up the scrubby mountainside above the camp to the spot where he and his family had slept during their first weeks on the island. There we sat on a fallen log in the shade of an ancient olive tree, encircled by clumps of brittle yellow grass and litter, and gazed out at the sea. One of the many ironies that comes from installing a hideous refugee camp on a beautiful island like Samos is that from every angle, the camp looks over a view fit for the gods. The northern Aegean stretches in its glittering turquoise and blues all the way to the sky. The town of Vathi lies like a tumble of sugar cubes at the bottom of the hill below the camp, and the lavender mountains of Turkey rise in the near distance, the very Anatolian range under which Homer had Odysseus glimpse the torches of Tantalus. It is hard to escape the thought that refugees on Samos suffer a similar fate, taunted wherever they turn by a horizon that promises distant lands they may never see, a beauty they lack the peace of mind to appreciate, and a freedom they fear they will never find. Eyad, Hassan, and the other refugees I met on Samos, and the ones who are in this book, embody an enormous change in modern history. Not only are there some 84 million forcibly displaced people in the world, more than at any time since World War II, and millions more since Putin invaded Ukraine, but they are fleeing a combination of war, civil unrest, religious conflict, poverty, persecution, local violence, and global warming, forces often inextricably intertwined. Just at a point when authoritarian governments are rising all over the world and anti-immigrant sentiment is rising with them. As a result, many refugees are being persecuted, demonized, and denied their legal rights, not only by those authoritarian nations, but within Europe, Britain, Australia, and the United States too, the very democracies that are supposed to protect them, and that in some cases turned them into refugees in the first place. The US's war on terror alone has displaced more than 37 million people since 2001. Some of the worst of this persecution is being played out in Greece. So that sort of explains why we focused on Greece in our story. It's a major gateway to Europe. And Eyad, can you talk a bit about like why people want to come to Europe from the Middle East and from Africa, and what, you know, why the people, your family and your other people you met there are hoping for?
Let's start first about me. Like the first reason and the only reason that I left Syria, it was, I guess every one of you has heard for the last 10, 11 years about the Syrian civil war. So the first reason was, and the only reason that I left, because the war, because like normally when you have like just clear enemy, you will fight, you will defend your homeland. But when you have like a civil war, this is really hard. So you cannot fight your cousin, you cannot fight your brother. So we were fighting each other. So in the beginning, we tried to leave the area we were in to another city, just to keep ourselves safe, away from the blood, the war. But in the end, we had to leave. So we left to the north of Syria, to a city controlled by the opposition, Idlib. The life there was like, also, you will see gun all the time. You are not safe. So we had to leave to Turkey. And the trip to Turkey alone, it is not safe as well, because there is a high chance you will be killed or you will get a bullet in your head. So our first station was Idlib in the north of Syria. After that, we moved to Turkey. We stayed there for a year and a half. And as for many of us as a Syrian, or because there are a lot of refugees and immigrants there. But the first thing in Turkey, you are not recognized as a refugee. No, they clearly say to you that you are a guest, which means you don't have any right as a refugee. For a year and a half, I was working there, as we say, and a lot of Syrians say, we are working like donkeys just to eat and drink and sleep. That's it. There is no life. I was student back then in my homeland. I was in the law school for 2 years, but I did not finish. I wasn't able to continue my study there. I had no right as a worker. For a year and a half, as I mentioned before, I was working. I don't know anything about contracts. If I lost my hand, this is not a big deal. Just go home, and that's it. There is discrimination. There is racism. Of course, not from all, but I would say a lot of people there, they look at us and they say that we are cowards because we came and we are hiding behind their backs. No, the only reason we came because I don't want to be in a war with my own blood, let's say that, or my brother, my friends, my cousins.
Yeah.
So after spending there a lot of time, we had to move to Greece because we were saying that in Europe we will find our safety and our dignity. So the first reason I was on Samos Island is searching for safety and dignity. Not just me, a lot of us as a refugee came to Europe because it is the homeland of safety and dignity. This is what brought us to Samos. And this is how we met.
Yeah.
You like to talk how we met?
Sure. But I would like to say first that I think one of the things that got me most caught up in this work at the beginning was how heartbreaking it was to hear people talk about the faith that they had in Europe and in the West, that this would be a place where they would find safety and dignity. And instead, they end up in one of the very worst, if not the worst, refugee camps in the whole of Europe, where they're treated without any dignity at all, and where there may not be bombs and bullets, but it's not safe at all. So because there's no security and there's no sanitation, and there's no healthy food, and you can't work and you can't go to school. And also if you're young or alone or a woman or LGBTQ, you've got no protection from other people who are war traumatized and angry and have their own problems from their own countries, and where there can be a lot of violence. So the shock that people, the disillusionment and shock that people were feeling when finding out, that all these promises that the West keeps boasting and bragging about were empty, was really a heartbreaking thing. But yeah, so that's why I went, because I wanted to see how this was playing out with real people in real life. And my second day there, I walked into a stationery shop to buy a map, and there was this young man ordering or asking for something in very good English with great politeness. And I wanted to talk to people who were living in the camp, not just the volunteers and officials. So I just accosted you and said, can I bring you for coffee somewhere? And I forgot to explain why at first. And then the shopkeeper said, you should tell him who you are and what you want first. Do you remember that moment?
I remember, really. When you are surrounded with a lot of strangers and most of the faces are not that welcoming, or it doesn't have a smile. So it was the nice thing about meeting you that day, your smile. But Unfortunately, we couldn't do it that day. We couldn't meet for coffee. So we say tomorrow if you have time. And the next day I saw you in the
Right.
camp when you were waiting for the camp manager to see her.
Yeah, and you had Hassan with you, and that's the moment that I just read from the introduction.
Exactly.
Yeah, so we hadn't actually talked yet. That was that day up on the hill when we first started to talk. And at the time, Hassan couldn't speak English very well. So you were acting as, which he can now. He's excellent at English now. But that was when you first began, you just sort of fell into being a translator for me. And then we just kept going like that. You would bring your friends, right, to meet me who wanted to talk about life in the camp, which is what I was interested in hearing about. And you would be the interpreter.
Exactly. Like a lot of them, they just were eager to talk, not because they felt that they need to tell the world about what is going there.
Yeah.
About their life, about the inhumane treatment. Like imagine in a camp where there are thousands of people and there is only one doctor. We have written everything about this in the book.
Yeah. Yeah. One
I
doctor.
was at that time also I showed Helen something I have written.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that was my article on Slate magazine.
Yeah. So right. So Eyad had a piece, that this essay he'd written, which he just described, and his lawyer had advised him to maybe use it to help his asylum case. So he asked me to look it over for the English, and when I looked it over, I saw that it was really beautifully written and very moving. So I asked him if I could polish it up a bit more, and I sent it to some magazines, and Slate magazine took it really fast and made it their cover story. So that was very thrilling for us. But there was something else I remember that happened with Hassan that has a lot to do with why the book exists now, or these years later, because this was 2018 when we met, which is he asked me at some point, because we kept meeting over and over again, because I was there for many weeks that first visit. He said, "Will you promise to tell my story one day?" And I promised, and so I had to keep my promise. But in the end, I didn't tell his story. He told his story. So maybe we should explain that.
Like the first thing we want to mention that in the book there is like 5 people and a whole chapter about women in Samos. So each one of the characters in the book, the subjects, tells her own story by its own word, because there is a reason for this. But just I want to mention that we wanted to write and to tell the story, the whole story, not just when they are in the camps where they are refugee. No, we wanted to tell the whole story back in their homelands and in their day.
Yeah.
Would you like to explain why we wanted to do that?
Sure. So, yeah, we thought it was really important not to do what a lot of journalists do, which is just only look at people in their moment of greatest trauma or drama and just pigeonhole them as just refugees. And the people we talked to felt the same, they wanted to be in the book because they wanted to push back against the stereotyping and demonizing of refugees that's all around us these days, being propagated, especially by the right wing, but it goes on everywhere, even unconsciously. And they felt that it was really important for them to be able to tell their whole life stories from childhood to this very year, to show, hey, we are human beings. We're not just refugees, whatever you think about that word. So we decided that that's why we could only have room for 5 people, because each person has 3 chapters: their home life, their journey away from home, their flight, and then their life in Greece. So the stories go back and forth a bit between their day-to-day life as we're interviewing them, as we're talking to them, which we did over months and months, in some cases years, and their past lives. And their past lives are all in their own words. And then we interject a little bit to have a conversation with them and set the scene for what's going on with them in the present moment. So that's the sort of structure.
Exactly. And like I would say also, I would to add that we want to tell that our life did not start at the border of Europe. Like, as I mentioned before, I was like student, and a lot of us also, they were like having goals and dreams to achieve.
Yeah.
But because of this, we couldn't do it. But still, we had a great life. Yes, it might be not rosy for all of us, but it was. We had this sense of feeling that we belonged to a place.
Right.
And the other reason that we wanted to write the book in their own words, because somehow the stories becomes closer to readers when they are told by the storyteller own words. When I know that I have the full control of the story, this is what Helen always repeated for us, for me and for the others. We want you to feel that you have your dignity to keep the story, or like to tell everything, or to leave some parts that you feel not important. So
Right. Yeah. And that was I had a couple of motivations for doing that, as well as what you mentioned, which is as a white Western journalist, I did not want to fall back into that traditional role of telling people stories for them, telling the stories of the voiceless, as the cliche goes. Why not get out of the way and give people a place to have their voices? So that was very appealing to several of the people we talked to. And Mursal, who is a young Afghan woman who escaped from Afghanistan with her family in 2019. She had to leave because they were being persecuted by the Taliban. That's the whole reason she agreed to be in the book, because it so appealed to her to be able to tell her story in her own words. She'd been keeping a journal the entire time that she was fleeing with her family, which was a long journey from Afghanistan to Greece, and they went through an awful lot, but she kept a running journal of it in English. So she had so much material already, and so we combined what she had written with what she told me, and her voice is very powerful in that. She'd been a top student in her school. She had been teaching other girls, and then everything was disrupted. She wanted to be a doctor like her father. So that goes back to what you were saying earlier, Eyad, about how people had lives and and careers and jobs and hopes and dreams are just rudely interrupted by their being forced to flee.
exactly. So
Yeah.
I would also say that for me personally, when I know that I have the control of my story, it makes me feel more comfortable, really. But why we wanted both, like the book, our emotional and our political reasons. Would you like to mention why in the first place, how did we end up writing this book?
Sure. So initially, we were going to keep up with this arrangement that we already had, where Eyad was acting as what we call in journalism my fixer. He was finding me people to interview and being the interpreter. And I kept going back to Greece. Between 2018, 2022, I went back 5 times, I think. Each time we met, and we met more people, and sometimes I did it on my own, sometimes I did it with you. And we decided that in 2020 that I would go back again, and we would go to some of the most remote refugee camps in Greece, right in the north, where it's very cold, right by the Macedonian border, because nobody was writing about those. And then, of course, it was March 2020. So guess what happened? The world shut down because of COVID, and I couldn't go. And that's when I had the idea that, hey, he's in Greece. He's a gifted interviewer. I watched the way people talk to Eyad, and you have a magic about you that makes people trust you, and the kindness, incredible. People just open up. And I already knew you were a beautiful writer because of the preface you'd written, and also because of other writings you'd shown me. So I just said, why don't we be co-authors? And you interview people there, because you are there where I can't be, people who speak Arabic, and I'll use WhatsApp to interview English and French speakers, whoever I can reach until I can go back. So I spent that first terrible COVID year, when we were all on the most severe lockdowns, doing these long interviews on this tiny little square. Usually people are in the dark because there's a 7-hour time difference between Greece and the US, with masks on. Oh, it was really difficult, but we managed until I could go back again last summer in 2021 and meet some of the people I'd only met on WhatsApp. And meanwhile, you were meeting more people too.
Yeah, because I spent almost a year in Samos camp. After that, I have been transferred to another camp in the north of Greece, near Kavala. And the closest town was near the camp was Policastro, like 5 kilometers. So I want to walk. If I want to go there, I need 1 hour to walk there. So there where I met Asmahan. Asmahan, she is a Syrian woman, and also she is in the book. We were spending hours and hours talking, and we built our relationship, our friendship there, because the only thing we could do is talking, digging about our memories, what we are dreaming to do later, and our hopes. We were sharing the painful moments in our past, but at the same thing, we kept our hope.
Yeah.
And you will know more about this in the book. I would say just a funny thing, like the first days when I met Helen, one day she mentioned, maybe one day we will write something together. We will work on something together, and look at us right now.
We still can't quite believe it all really happened.
Yeah.
It's just amazing to us. That is another thing that's really special about this book, is we don't have a normal journalist source relationship. Eyad and Asmahan are really good friends. I'm friends with all the other people in the book. Hassan, the Mursal, the Afghan girl I mentioned, a young gay man I met who's on Samos, called Evans, who escaped from Nigeria because of the homophobic laws there, and a political refugee called Calvin from Cameroon. And I talk to them every day. Most days, not every day. I talk to most of them almost every day, and we're still in touch. So kept going, and you talk to Asman quite a lot too, right? So
Exactly.
we're more like it's a kind of friendship. It's not just interviewer, interviewee. And I think you can feel that when you read the book, because there's a kind of intimacy and trust that comes out in their stories that readers have really remarked on a lot. So I'm really glad we managed to do that. It was very important to both of us.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like as I said before, as I mentioned, when you are surrounding in a place like a prison-like place, like the camp, you don't have anything to do except your way of acting and dealing with people around you. And this is how our relationship becomes stronger and stronger with time. Yeah. And when you feel that the other person who listened to you is not going to judge you or is not going to force you to say anything against your wishes.
Yeah.
This is so important for Helen, for me, and for the people in the book.
Yeah.
There is a reason for our book. And the reason is that we want to change the way that people in the West and in Europe looks at us as a refugee. Because a lot of them, they have false information about us, that we are there to steal their jobs, to change their culture, or to like do something bad. And this is not the truth.
Right.
Wanted to show everyone that in this book, we have dreams, we have like goals, and we have white hearts.
Right. Which is a beautiful Arabic expression we don't use in English, but it means a pure heart. We call it pure hearts. Yeah.
Yeah. There are a lot of things.
Yeah,
This
this is one of the things we have such fun doing, is talking about language and translation, the difference, the overlaps and differences between Arabic and English. It endlessly fascinates us. But back to the politics for a moment. All that's terribly important, and I was also compelled by this story because of the way we've been treating refugees in this country, especially since Trump and the Muslim ban and the caging of children and the separating of families and the denial of all kinds of rights and the sticking people in detention centers forever, well, not forever, but for way too long. All that kind of cruelty that is so unnecessary and incidentally isn't being done to Ukrainian refugees. And when the Trump administration, and particularly Sessions, who was the architect of a lot of this, and then Stephen Miller, began to persecute refugees, and especially brown and black ones, it got much worse in Europe too. It was as if they opened the door to this persecution. So I wanted to trace the way that's happening all over the world, because we're only going to see more and more and more forced migration because of climate and because of wars erupting all over the place. And if we don't get it right now, we're just going to go further and further into cruelty. And so our book is everything Eyad said about trying to push back against prejudices and stereotypes, but it is also a call for a more reasonable, humane approach to refugees. And the chapter at the end of our book has recommendations of policy that needs to be changed, as well as what we as individuals, any single person, can do to help as well. And that was important for us to have that in the book.
Exactly, like you are not going just to face the stories, only bad stories or sad stories of refugees or what they are facing. Also, you will see that we have written like some solutions and these solutions like based on experts and about people who has concern about refugees. And there is something I would like to mention, and we mentioned this before, like there was a lot of people who wanted to be in the book. But would you like to explain why we have chosen?
Yeah, we had to both leave out quite a few of the people we've been talking to, which was really hard to do and felt very sad, but because it was getting too long and our publisher said, we can't do this. We have like a 5-volume set. So we wanted to try and get a representational range of people, men and women, different ages, from different countries, cultures, and religions, as much as you can represent with only 5 people. And we've managed that pretty well. I mean, one of the things that was happening in Greece with the populations coming over is that initially, when the largest number of people started coming in 2015, it was mostly Syrians and Iraqis, and then a little bit, then just below that, Afghans. And then by the time I was going back in 2019, there were many, many more people from Eritrea, from Cameroon, from the Congo in particular, Nigeria, and Somalia. Those were the main countries, you know, and it's obvious why if you look at what's been the conflicts that have been happening. So the population was very different over those 4 years, and it started. So we wanted to represent that as well. And I also wanted to concentrate on women for one chapter, as Eyad mentioned, and through the story of Evans, the Nigerian young man, to also shed a light on the plight of LGBTQ refugees who have particular challenges to meet when they end up in a camp. So that story is also a powerful one, I think, in there. So those are the people we chose. And you'll get to know them really well. I think they'll feel like friends when you read their stories. Yeah.
You won't just read, you will imagine yourself like living in their houses, in their place, and seeing everything through their eyes.
Yeah, yeah. You know, I want to just talk a little bit about the hope part of our title, because I don't want people to think that the book is just sad stories. And there's a reason we call it Map of Hope and Sorrow. So you want to say something about that?
Like, I would say that with everything you are facing, there is braveness. Like for us, we were in camp, and a lot of people, they will say this will kill your hope. No, in fact, we kept our hope, because hope what keeps us alive. We hope like to see our children, to the people who has been moved to Greece, who has been like escaped his or her country, away from his children. There is hope that one day everything will be fine and we will be able to see them, to see our beloved one. So hope is always with us.
Yeah. And it's true, it takes a battering. I mean, there are moments like Hassan said, you know, when you introduced him to me, here's a man with no hope. Because there are times when you do feel like your hope is realistic. But human beings are really amazing. And I think the kinds of people who face the dangers of the journeys that they took are special, especially determined people, and especially admirable. And they're kind of people that every country should be happy to have. So that kind of that determination is something that gave me hope when in listening to the stories. But there are other things too. One of them is that, you know, as I was doing my research, I especially looked up all the surveys I could find about how do citizens of the world feel about refugees. And I was very encouraged to see that the majority of ordinary people, regardless of what right-wing governments I might be saying, believe that anybody who has to flee their country to stay alive deserves protection and respect from wherever the countries that they land in. Even like 60% of Americans feel that way, or the last survey that was taken on that. There should be more than 60%, but it's still much more than half. So that gives me hope. And then look at how the world has welcomed Ukrainians. Of course, there's a bitter side to that, because it's quite obvious that people, you know, that the West has been much nicer to white refugees than they've been to brown and black refugees. Never mind if Muslims versus Christians. But the point is that if we have the will, we can do it. And all the right-wing arguments about oh, refugees are too expensive, or they're a burden on us, or they're going to suck our social security systems dry, our welfare systems dry, which is actually demonstrably not true when you look at the economics. All those suddenly flew out of the window when it came to Ukrainians. So that's a model for how we should be treating everybody. And there are some places that are recognizing this. I just wanted to bring up something I read this morning, actually, because when I was in England, the book came out in England and in the UK in June 1st, before here. And just before I joined Eyad in Iceland, I was in London when the Boris Johnson, before he'd been kicked out, announced that they were this policy of rounding up refugees and putting them on the plane, actually to Rwanda. They were stopped at the airport by the European High Commission Court, said this is illegal, it's a violation of their rights. But the government is still doing it. So Liz Truss, our newest ex-Prime Minister, there's a fast revolving door going on there. And all the people who are lined up to be the next Prime Minister on the Conservative side they all believe in this Rwanda proposition. And just today I read in the New York Times that one of the airlines that they had chartered to take the refugees to Rwanda has said that they refuse to do it and they're not going to fly any more planes to Rwanda. So there's a moment of hope. And people say, no, this is wrong. I won't be part of it. Even if you pay me, I won't be part of it. So there are still people doing the right thing.
Do you think we have time to read something nice about what you were talking from Marcel?
Yeah. So on the subject of hope, I mentioned when I was talking about Marcel, the Afghan young woman, that she'd been writing her own diary. And at the end of the chapters about her, I included a message she has really for all of us. And this is what she says. Do you know about refugees' dreams? If our country was at peace, we would never leave. No one wishes to live in a tent or a camp. Everyone loves their home. Unfortunately, the Taliban came to our city and started fighting. Right before we left our country, we waited for the new year to come, but our new year opened with war and the sound of bombs, not with balloons. That night we had no dinner, only tears. We come here to Europe because we hope to give our children a good life and a future. We want to wake up to the sound of clocks, not bombs. We want to sleep without fear. We want to hear only the sounds of our family's laughter. We sold our home and everything we owned. Now we do not have anything. I hope one day we can find someone who loves and supports us, who will talk with us, not hate us. Refugees are not bad people. Please stop hating us. Just put yourself in our place. How would you feel if you were insulted every day on the bus? Would you be patient? If you look, you will see we are just like you. Some people see refugees as homeless, nameless, unclean, uneducated, and criminal. Yes, we are homeless, but not hopeless. We are nameless, but not weak. If we are unclean, it is because we slept in the forest, streets, and tents, but we have clean hearts. If our crime is speaking up for our rights and freedom, yes, we are criminals. If you do not want to see any refugees or migrants, fine, but please do not insult us. Sometimes only one word or action from you can make us feel as if our whole life is a jail. My mum always tells me, just calling someone a donkey does not make them a donkey. Calling us bad and unclean does not make us bad and unclean. Being a refugee means you are strong. You pass through a difficult, dangerous journey and still you are alive. You have hope. You have goals and dreams. As my mom also says, when you find yourself in a bad situation, just remember this. After every dark night, a beautiful morning will come.
Thank you.
She's very proud that I'm reading this. She's just spoke to her the other day, and she says hello to everybody.
It's such a beautiful piece. Thank you for sharing it, and to her for writing it too. We have a couple questions for both of you. Let's start with Eyad. Eyad, please tell us about the circumstances that allowed you to leave Greece. Let's start with that one.
So I think like in the book, you will see what is the procedures when you are seeking asylum in Greece. But I would say that the only reason that I was able to leave Greece because I was given like a travel documents and official like ID. So that was the only reason that I could leave Greece. Otherwise, I would be kept there. Like a lot of asylum seekers, they are rejected, which means they don't have any documents or travel documents, so they are not allowed to leave Greece. And about the life here in Iceland, I would say that it's really pretty going well. Like there is a chance for me to continue my education, and I am able to work now. I am already working, so that's important too.
But it took you years to get those documents.
Exactly.
Yeah.
As we mentioned before, like we met in 2018 and I was in Samos 2017, and I only left Greece 10 months ago.
Okay. So we're talking like 4 or 5 years.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I know some people, they are still there.
Yeah, for some it takes even longer. And in fact, many of the people who arrived later on after Eyad and his family arrived, the wait is even longer. And it's also, there's a new government that came in 2019, and they've been upping the cost of applying for all these documents. So it's also very expensive, which for somebody who's not allowed to work or can't find a job because a lot of Greeks won't hire refugees, and because the economy is so weak there, it puts them in this trap where they can't get out for years sometimes.
And more on that for Eyad. So thank you for this important work and for this event. Eyad, what are you doing now? What are your future plans? Have you found Syrian community in Iceland?
Of course, like in every country, you will find someone from your homeland. But the beauty of being a human, that you are able to integrate with the community you are in, like with Icelandic or with any person. So there is a refugees community here. And yes, like what I am doing, I'm working in a company for now, and my plan is to continue my study. Maybe one day I will become a real lawyer.
Thank you. Thank you for answering. Clearly, there's a lot of curiosity, a lot of interest and hope for you for the future. And Helen, we have a question for you. How did you come to this work over 10 years ago?
Brief, it's a long story. I'll try and answer quickly. It really started when we invaded Iraq, and I was so horrified by the injustice and senselessness at war that I wrote a book about women, American women who were serving in Iraq, and then I quickly got interested in the Iraqis themselves and began to interview Iraq refugees here. And then when the Syrian war started in 2011, I realized that a lot of Iraqis were going to be doubly displaced because many of them had fled to Damascus and then they were going to flee again. So I thought I would go to these refugee camps where so many were ending up and try and meet Iraqi refugees. And I met I met Eyad instead, and so I mean, he did introduce me to some Iraqis, but I ended up going in a different direction. But it's all related because the we invaded Iraq for no reason. We created all the refugees from that country. Then we turn around and become even more Islamophobic, and then we ban them. And this applied, of course, not only to Iraq. And I felt like there were echoes of the way Jews had been treated, Jewish refugees had been treated when they were fleeing the Nazis. And I'm half Jewish, and I relate to that. And I thought the whole reason that we set up the Geneva Convention and the Refugee Convention in 1951 was that the West promised never to treat refugees like that again, because by we, I mean the UK and the US, I'm a citizen of both countries, sent Jews back to their deaths, which essentially murdered them. And I thought, how can we possibly be breaking that promise and be doing this again? And that just really, it just got to me. I just had to do something about it. And that's sort of what drove me. And being persecuted for your religion or your culture or your skin color is inexcusable. So that's really, I suppose, the basic motivation that got me into all of this.
Thank you, Helen. We don't have any more questions. I'll give people another minute to write theirs in if you'd like. But while we're waiting, I have a question. You mentioned the additional challenges for women and queer people in the camps. I wonder if you could say a little bit more about that, Helen.
Yeah. Well, in both cases, the people who arrive at the camp have very often undergone a lot of physical and or sexual violence before they even arrive, either because of the targeting of women in war or because of the targeting of queer people by homophobic societies, cultures, and laws. So you flee having already been traumatized. Then you arrive in the camp and find that there's no special protection for you as a rape survivor or a torture survivor. There's nothing. And if you're on your own, I mean, I met many women who were living alone in tents, and the only protection they had was a little padlock on the zip of a tent. You know, what kind of, and so some of them were being targeted, especially the ones who were alone, you know, by certain men in the camp who just saw, oh, this is an easy victim, and were being attacked over and over again. And there were a few NGOs who tried to help, but most of them were unable to get any kind of help or protection, or let alone psychological treatment or the kind of medical attention you need when you've been through that kind of thing. And the LGBTQ people, they often can end up in this very paradoxical situation where they might be in a community of people from their own country who are there, who are refugees for political or other reasons, or to escape being conscripted into a horrible war by an extreme militant group or something, but they might still have the same homophobia that comes out of their culture. So being in your own community of refugees in a refugee camp is no protection at all. And indeed, quite a lot of the queer people at the camp were being targeted and attacked very viciously. And I discovered all this because one of the main NGO there, it's called Samos Volunteers, one of the volunteers there, who's gay himself, started a secret support group for LGBTQ refugees, and it had to be secret because they couldn't be out in the camp. It's too dangerous for them. And he very kindly let me come to the first in-person meeting they had since COVID, which was a secret meeting behind locked doors. That's how much danger they're in. And it was extremely moving. There were about 28 people there. Many of them came from countries where it's not only illegal to be queer, but it's illegal to even have support services to run any kind of center or or help for queer people. So they often had never had a community, but they'd always had to live in secret until that moment they met in that room, which I happened to get to witness. So I explain a lot of that about the plight. There are 71 countries in the world. When I was doing my research, maybe it's dropped to 69 now, where it's criminalized to be queer in one way or the other. So a lot of people are in danger, and that support group was a lifeline for them.
Thank you, Helen. I'm so glad that that support group exists, even if I'm sure it's a very hard thing to continue.
Well, I might say that something has really changed in Samos and in Greece for the worse since 2021, which is that while I was there, the Greek government with EU funding was building a closed detention center, i.e. a prison for asylum seekers in the middle of the island, far away from any town. Like the one that Eyad was in was open, right? You could walk around, you could leave when you wanted. But now they're behind hurricane fences, concrete walls, concertina wires, with all wearing bracelets, with closed circuit television, all being controlled from Athens. And they're not allowed out unless they have with ID. It takes months and months to get, and not everybody gets. So now they're actually, when you're an asylum seeker, you are being put in prison, and no NGOs are allowed inside that complex. So, and there's no protection at all for any of for women, particular protection for women or queer people or anybody. So torture survivors. So Samos volunteers set up a kind of temporary headquarters just outside the camp, but only the people who can get permission to get out can even use it. So and they're building 4 more of these prisons in Greece, and the EU is celebrating this, by the way, or some people are, as a model for the way refugees should be treated in the future. It is illegal to imprison an asylum seeker who is not a criminal. Asylum seeker has an international human right to request asylum and even to enter a country illegally. They are allowed to do this without being charged on the books, but in reality, that's not what happens. And then there are the pushbacks. You want to explain a bit about that, Eyad? What's happening?
I would say like there are a lot of reports about this, and you see that even like they fired real bullets against the boats. And there is like a news about a few days ago. It was about refugees who has been naked between the border, Greece and Turkey.
There was 92 men stripped and left there on the border and beaten up.
Yes.
So it's the people who are pushing them back are Frontex, which is the Coast Guard of Europe, and the Greek Coast Guard, and they're supposed to rescue refugee boats that are floundering, but instead they've been firing at them or pushing them back out to sea, and there have been something like 3,000 drownings already in the last year.
Yeah.
So it's getting very dire.
Yeah.
Human Rights Watch, the UN, even and some factions of the EU keep shaking their fingers at Greece and saying you have to behave better than this, but nothing's really changing. The government just denies they're doing it, even though there's been plenty of evidence.
That's all heartbreaking and incredibly distressing to hear. And in the book, you end, I'm sure a lot of people feel the way that I do after you hear these stories and you hear that specifically. You want to do something. You want to take action. You don't want to just let these stories sit in your mind and not do something afterward. And so in the book, you outline quite a few ways to, the ways that regular people can get involved when this. Could you just tell us a few right now?
Sure. Well, there are organizations that you can be in touch with which will help you, for example, invite a newly arrived refugee family for tea or dinner. If you have an extra room or a spare house, you can also put people up. You can volunteer, you can donate. You can, when you hear your friends reiterate some of the myths that we've been talking about, such as, the Muslim refugees are going to come and change our way of life. That's what they're here for. You can gently push back against that, with the truth. You can vote for politicians who do not use human beings as pawns. But there's one other thing you can do. You want to talk about that? It's just an everyday important thing.
I think if you cannot do anything of what Helen mentioned, just being nice is enough. Being nice with a smile, this is more than enough for some of us, really. Because, okay, you cannot do anything, but at least I'm sure that you can be nice.
Yeah, just if you see somebody who's newly arrived, or Venezuelans, for example, are pouring into various American democratic places now because of they're being shuffled around by right-wing governors and like DeSantis, and supposedly they're being used to punish us liberals by saying so. It's not as if you are not surrounded by refugees, even if the newspapers are calling them migrants. Just a smile, a welcome,
And that's it.
Yeah, it's like what Marcel was saying. She was talking when she said about the insults on the bus, where she's met with, she doesn't even wear hijab anymore, but people somehow, they don't know whether she's Palestinian, Pakistani, or what. She's Afghan, but people are always asking. They just know she's not Greek, and people are incredibly rude to her all the time and to her family. And she expressed how much that hurts, as opposed to someone who's smiling and just nice. It's just human.
Thank you both. It's good to have the action and end there too. I also put in the chat the link to the Rian Immigrant Center, great friends of ours at this series. They do a lot of this work here in Boston and are always looking for volunteers.
That's great. And another really good organization is Raíces. They welcome refugees over the border here, especially Spanish-speaking ones. Raíces meaning roots in Spanish. So RAICES. They're a very good organization, and they love it if anybody would like to volunteer to read to children or at a detention center, or there are all different ways you donate clothes or books or drawing things or writing materials, whatever. That's another place to find out about.
Do we have a time to answer the question from Linda?
Yes, I was just about to ask that. So Linda asks, what are each of you working next in terms of writing? What are you working on next?
I would say, Helen, could you start, because yours is closer than
Okay.
your work is closer.
I am finishing up a novel called The Good Deed, which is what I actually went to Samos originally to research, because it is set there in the camp, but it's a novel. And it's going to come out in 2024. And Eyad has helped me with it enormously. You've read every word and helped me get the Syrian backstory right, and also daily facts about life in the camp and so on. So it's a story about a group of women who are at the camp. From most are Syrian, but one is from the Sudan, and an American woman whose life gets tangled up in a complicated way with their lives.
It was a pleasure working with you. About me, I guess there is nothing ready yet, but maybe soon, who knows?
Wonderful. Thank you both. I love ending there. So you can get Map of Hope and Sorrow from us. Just came out on Tuesday. We're really thrilled to have it on our shelves. I would encourage you, as another thing to do, it is to support with your money, with your purchasing power, the stories of refugees, to show that you are interested in that at bookstores, at libraries, if you can't purchase it, to request it from your local library, to show an interest and to continue getting these stories.
Yes, and I might say if anybody belongs to a book club and would be interested in having us speak there or something, be in touch. You can get in touch with me through just my website, helenbenedict.com.
That's wonderful. Thank you both. Thank you both for this conversation. Thank you everyone who joined us from here and abroad. And it's been a lovely time with you all.
Thanks.
Thanks a lot
Thanks for having us.
for you and for everyone too.
Yeah. Thanks for the great questions as well.
And goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye.
Bye.